So now we're on Daf Yudam at base. Umayshna. So why do you say if there's a suffix as to whether it was a drusa, whether it was drisa and there was shehiyah, you have to be machmir. Hasam is yalid be'reisa be'behem. Hacha sakin Israel behem alo Israel. Again, we're going to repeat the same logic of Rav Chizda, and we're going to say that Rav Chizda will concede to the position of Rav Huna if there's a race on the animal itself. And therefore, in the case where you have a doubt whether the shchita was a shchita psula, because he paused in the middle or he pressed it down, so in such a case, you can't say harei shchuta lefanecha, because you don't know if the shchita was good. So the animal itself has a suffix whether it had a shchita on it. The only time Rav Chiz's mekil is when shchuta lefanecha, and the problem is, well, maybe there was a nick on the knife. The knife is extraneous to the animal, and it's lowest solid bone raised of the The Gemara comes to the following complex conclusion: Halacha l'maisa. Hilchas hakavasi de Rav Huna kishelo shiber ba'etzem, but hilchas hakavasi de Rav Chizda kishiber ba'etzem. Meaning that we're going to accept Rav Huna in a case where there's no tliya. He wasn't chopping up bones. If he wasn't chopping up bones, and we find a nick on the knife after the shchita, we have to assume that maybe the shchita was shchita psula. Even though Rav Chizda apparently would be mekil because the suffix is nolad on the knife, we're going to accept Rav Huna l'chum. But in a case where there is a tliya, and therefore we have every reason to believe that the shchita was a good, valid shchita, the knife was not nicked at the time of the shchita, and the behema is shchuta lefanecha, and the reisa now is a reisa on the knife that was nolad after the shchita, and not only that, but shiber ba'etzem, and we have a tliya, then we're going to accept Rav Chizda. So it seems like we accept Rav Chizda, but only conditional on two conditions. Number one, it's got to be that the reusa is not in the shchita but in the knife. And number two, only when the knife and its reusa is subject to a tliya, namely shiver ba'etzem. So the Gemara says the following: Michlal de Rav Chizda. Well, if you're saying that we paskin like Rav Huna in Lo Shiber Ba'etzem, it means that Rav Chizda argues in that case. Otherwise, you wouldn't have to say Hilchas Akir Rav Huna. Is Michlal, let's derive from this, the Rav Chizda, Afal Gav de Lo Shiber Ba'etzem. What's going on over here? Can you strip Rav Chizda of the tliya? Can you tell me that we can assume the knife was kosher where we have no reason to assume that the nick happened because of X, Y, or Z? How do you do that? El b'mayivka. What caused the knife to be nicked if he didn't cut up any bones, such that Rav Chizda could say, you know what? I have a tliya. I have a reason to believe that at the time of the shchita, there was no nick in the knife. And the Gemara answers, Ema bi etzem de mafrekes ifka. So he said that the simonim, on the one hand, when he goes in to cut, he hits the hide. In most cases, that's not going to cause any nicks on the animal, otherwise every shchita would be possible. But after he cuts the two simonim, then it hits the neck bone. That's a bone. A bone will cause nicks, but those nicks occurred after the shchita. Havi uvda v'toraf Rav Yosef ad tleisar chevasa. Somebody slaughtered 13 animals, one after the other. And guess what? He didn't check out the knife between each shchita. And after the 13th shchita, he found a nick on the knife. And Rav Yosef said that all 13 shchitos, all 13 animals are treif. Now we're going to see as we go through the Gemara that it could be that Rav Yosef was machshir the first shchita of the 13, because he did check the knife before the first shchita. We'll see. Come on. In the machlokas between Rav Huna and Rav Chizda, l'chora, it seems logical that Rav Yosef had accepted Rav Huna. Ki Rav Huna, but now the Gemara asks, Vafilu v'kamaisa? How far are you going to go with the ruling and the logic of Rav Huna? Are you going to go as far as to say that Rav Yosef hassled, or shall we say, trafed up the first shchita? After all, he checked the knife before he did the first shchita. There was no nick. But rather, Rav Chizda, I would rather go with a different approach, suggests the Gemara. That Rav Yosef accepted the shita Rav Chizda, ulabarmi kamaisa, and Rav Yosef trafed up the 12 shchitos after the first, with the exception of the first. The Gemara is not so happy with this, and the Rishonim talk about why not. Because there are two issues over here. One issue is, do we rely on the checking of the knife because the first shchita, meaning we're assuming that according to Rav Huna, had he checked it after he did the first shchita, he would have found already a nick. And that would have been, according to Rav Huna, reason enough to trafe up the first shchita. Let's try a different approach. Li'olam k'Rav Huna. Why not suggest that according to Rav Huna, after he finished the first shchita, already at that point there was a suffix, we didn't know about it, we found out about it later on, but he didn't check the knife after the first shchita, and therefore Rav Yosef took Rav Huna to the extreme, and even the first of the 13 animals is treif. Because after shchita, Rav Huna requires some sort of bedika to establish that the knife has no pegimos. Now, why does the Gemara favor the second interpretation? Let's see the Gemara inside. We already spoke it out. Iker of Chizda Michti, Minatali Talinon, since Rav Yosef, according to our original pshat, right, Roman rule number 1, accepted Rav Chizda, and that's why we said in the original pshat that Rav Yosef would have been machshir the first animal of the 15, and mitla talina. Now, what's mitla talina according to Rav Chizda? That after he shechted the 2 simonim, then he hit the bone. and that caused the nick after the shechita. No, if that be the case, then clearly all the other 12 shechitos would be possible, would be treif. Is mimai to be etzem de mafrekas mekamaisa ifgam, dilma be etzem mafrekas de basraisa ifgam. But if you're going with the logic of Rav Chizda, that after the shechita, the knife got caught up in nick by hitting the bone, the neck bone, maybe it got caught on the last of the 13, which would mean that all 13 animals are kosher. And therefore the Gemara favors identifying Rav Yosef with Rav Huna. Amalei Rav Acha Berei de Rav Ashi Rav Kahana Matzich b'dikusa ben kol chad v'chad. According to Rav Kahana, like Rav Huna, we need to inspect the knife after each one of the shchitas because maybe be etzem nifkamo. Come on. Shall we say that Rav Acha ki Rav Huna ulemifsal kamaisa, and even the first shchita is psula because he did not implement an inspection, and ultimately he finds a pegim in the knife, and he has to assume lest the knife had that pegim at the time of the first shchita lo. Ki Rav Chizda ulachshure basraisa. What does Achshure Basraisa mean? That since, according to Rav Chizda, we go with the approach that the shchita knife became peguma when it hit the neck bone, therefore, we should assume that the last shchita that he did might have already had a pegima. So now the Gemara is saying that you want to validate shchita, you got to do a b'dika. Frekti Gemara, ihachiti boy nami b'dikas chacham. Are we going to say that after every shchita in the face of the earth, we need a chacham to come and do it? Usually a chacham is called upon when there's some sort of a suffix. But now you're saying that, well, you know, you did this shchita and that shchita, and maybe it hit the neck bone and therefore became pagum and so forth and so on. We should always require a chacham. When it says Eid Echad, then Visurit. The shochet himself is an Eid Echad, and he could testify to the effect that he didn't hit the bone. And not only that, the Gemara is suggesting now that you don't have to call in a chacham to make this bedika. Let's ask the Eid Echad to do the bedika, and if he says, I did the bedika, and I checked the knife, and there was no pegima, then we'll rely on him. If that be the case, may karanami lo. Why do you say that at the very beginning of a shechita you have to call in a chacham? As if to say that, you know, we need one absolutely reliable bedika, and then after that we could just shecht with the animal and rely on Eid Echad. Amar Rav Chizda. The whole deal about showing the knife to the chacham is only a matter of kavod hachacham. Right? He's the chacham in the city, the local scholar, and we just have to give him kavod. But technically, we don't even need the bedika of a chacham because Eid Echad nem Visurim can rely on the inspection of the shofar. By the way, I just out of curiosity, Ira, did you ever see a chacham check the knife?
No, I never saw that.
I'll tell you where I saw it. I saw it in Budapest.
Oh, really?
Yeah, in the shul in Budapest, at least at that time. I'm going back, I don't know, 15, 20 years ago. I don't know how long ago I was in Budapest. So the Rav there is a real stark Ashkenazi Rav, you know, lechumra. And he had the shochet because there's a lot of meat being served and sent from Hungary to other countries. He had him check the knife. And it
Oh,
was
really?
unbelievable. He was so careful to make sure there was no nick on the knife.
Really?
Minoha milsa diarabanan uki milsachas kose. This is an unbelievably famous Gemara. This is like we're learning Shas now. How do we know, based on Torah law, that the Torah relies on chazaka, status quo? Amar Shmuel Achman Rav Yonasan, Amar Kra, we have to deal with the parsha of Mitzorah. What happens in the parsha Mitzorah? The Kohen comes in, he sees the nega, then he goes out and he declares Hezger. You got to close up the house for a week. Yotza Kohen
Mhm.
min Abayis, the Torah says, O Pesach Abayis, Hiskiros Abayis, Shavas Yomin. The house has to be closed up for 7 days. Then he's going to come back at the end of the 7 days and see what happened to the nega. Did it spread? Did it not spread? Frek the Gemara, Dilma Adenofik vi Asa, Batzale Shiura. Right, there's a minimum shear, which I think is Kigris, if I'm not mistaken. Let me just see if I'm right here. All right, well, we'll see it in a minute. And he saw the nega. Maybe as he walks out of the house, the nega got smaller. It shrunk. We assume that for sure the status quo continued and the nega, as it had the minimum shear at the time that the Kohen saw it, continued to maintain that shear. I'll read to you the line here. He says, while he was in the house, he saw the nega and it had the shear. He cannot know for sure. Maybe the affliction did or did not shrink by the time he shut the door. Evidently, the Torah relies on chazaka, and we assume that the affliction did not shrink since he last saw it. Maskif Rav Acha bar Yaakov, we have to reject this attempt at finding a source through Tzoraz. Dilma could go Rov. Maybe he walked backwards out of the house, and that's what the Torah requires. So he could look at the affliction and the nega and determine the very moment that he shuts the door that it still has the shear. To go Chazelekinofa. Omalei Abaye, no. Shtei Shuvas Bedov. He's going to reject Rav Acha bar Yaakov. Now, how Abaye knows this is beyond me. In Bias Migdash, where the Tomei is not allowed to go into the Migdash, there's an issue about going in backwards.
Mm.
How does Abaye know that that applies to the Kohen, that he's not allowed to go in, he's not allowed to move back with his back this way? The Ode, furthermore, even if I would grant you your assumption that the Kohen could go in backwards, but nevertheless, what's going on behind the door? He cannot see the nega as he shuts the door, even if he goes backwards, because it might be behind the door. We must say, therefore, that we rely on chazaka. Maybe he'll say that he has to cut, a window into the door so he can see what's me'achori adelis. Watnan by yisafel and postin lo b'chalonis there's a nego. So we don't cut a hole in the door. Amalei Rava rejects Abaye. Dikamer Yitzia derech achorov. Your first answer Shma Yitzia, Lav Shma Yitzia. Kohen Gadol b'Yom Kippurim Yochiach. Dichsiv beYitzia. Utnan Yotza Ubolo derech Nisaso. That if the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippurim walks backwards, then that's fine. So you see that as far as Kohen Gadol is concerned, even Derech Achora qualifies as a Yitzia to fulfill the pasuk of Yotza. Yotza koimen abayi. No. V'yotza soloso. So you see that a Kohen can walk backwards out of the house. And that should apply to the case of the Kohen to be masgir the house. And therefore, there's no proof that we rely on chazakah. What about your second argument, Abaye? To come with Bayis Ofel and Poskin Bo Chalonis Lirsus Nigo, Hani Mili, Hecha Delo is Chazik. Al Hecha is Chazik is Chazik. In other words, if there's a suffix as to whether or not there was a nega on the bias, then we don't start playing games over here. Let's cut out a window and see. But here, where he saw the nega, and the Kohen knows right now this chazaka that this nega is a nega tzoras, it has the shear, then a window can be cut in order to allow the Kohen haros hanega to have continuous sight on the affliction and to strengthen and support the chazak. And therefore, Rava concludes like Ravacha, Bar Yaakov, that we cannot accept the principle that from Negat Aras we can prove chazak. Tanya de Loker of Achabar Yaakov, Yotza Kohen ben Abayis, Yochol Yelech Letoch Beiso v'Yazgir. Is the Kohen allowed to go home? And when he reaches his own house, which he lives apparently next door to the house with the nega, and then he could do the hezger, Tamalomer el Pesach Habayis. In other words, the Kohen has to go to the entrance of the house. He can't go to his own house next door. I Pesach Habayis Yochel Yamod Tachas Hamashko v'Yazgir. Maybe it's enough that he does hezger while he's at the, underneath the mashkov. Tamalom min abayis. He's got to go out of the bayis. Achiyetze min abayis kulo. If he's underneath the mashkov, he hasn't left the house completely. Okay, it said, Omi v'tzad mashkov. He's outside of the mashkov. Umazgir. Uminayin shem holach l'tok beiso v'hizgir. Osha omad. B'di'evid, right? He only was masgir the bais after he came home into his house. Or he did a hezger while he was still in the bais. Hezger muskar, b'di'evid, it's all valid. Tamlom v'hizgir sabayis, it's an extra ribui mikol makom, meaning that the closing of the house is effective. So what do we learn from this? That a Kohen has the capacity to be masgir a bias while the affliction is out of sight, and this therefore should prove that the Torah relies on chazak, namely that the affliction did not shrink. So Gemara says, Rav Acha bar Yaakov, what's he going to do with this brisa? We'll just see the first part of Daf Yud Aleph. Kigon de kaime dor de gavre. There's a whole shura of people standing that lead from the base Hamenuga all the way to his house, the Kohen's house. The Amri Koi Koi, and they testify to the fact that the affliction did not shrink. So since the Kohen is being told, even though he himself can't personally or on his own, he cannot guarantee that the affliction did not shrink, but nevertheless he knows it didn't shrink on the basis of the Amri of those who tell him so, then that's enough to assume that the affliction didn't shrink. And therefore, Rav Acha says there's no proof from here to establish chazak. Okay, then. So this is where we'll
Okay,
stop.
shkoyach.
Okay, have a great
Very
week.
good. Yeah, you too. Have a good week. Thank
Yeah.
you. Shkoyach.
Okay.